Hi, my name is Michelle. I'm the programs manager for the GVPTA, and this is our final panel of today in our Making a Scene event and our day to day, which is all around taking care. So we're really, really excited. We've had two super interesting conversations today, and this is our third one. If you do, as Kenji put in the chat, if you would like to utilize captions or ASL interpretation, those buttons are just at the bottom of your screen. The panelists, we can't see you. Attendees, we won't be able to see you on your camera, but if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A window. And if you have any technical issues, you can put them in the chat and Kenji or I will see them and will help you out. So this year, our Making a Scene event is all around taking care, nourishment, and restoration. And so today we've had these three online panels 1 week from today on the 20. Oh, okay. No, nobody has audio. So just looking in the chat here, we can't see you at all. So whatever noise or is going on there, don't worry about it. So 1 week from today, we have our in-person Making a Scene event, which is we have a lot of food, we have a lot of artistic offerings, and keynote speech by Tasha Faye Evans, which is really going to be wonderful. If you're interested in attending, today is the last day to register, so please go ahead and do that. If you have any concerns around payment, we do have subsidies available, so please do not hesitate to apply for those. And we'd love to see you there if you're interested. We'd like to thank our interpreters, Alex and Monica, who are here interpreting ASL for us. Also our funders, we have the BC Arts Council and the City of Vancouver. And we have our sponsors, the Professional Association of Canadian Theatre, CUPE, CITT, IATSE Local 168, and Opera Mariposa, who have sponsored our masks and our safety supplies for our in-person gathering next week. We had two panels today already. The first one this morning was around joy, cultivating joy in our practice, which was really lovely. Just now, about a couple hours ago, we had a panel around practices of care in creation around climate issues, working within the climate crisis. And that was super interesting. There were a ton of resources shared. So if either of those interest you, all of these videos will be available by the end of the week on our website. So you can watch them, check them out, or share them with any friends. I'm gonna now welcome our panelists. We have a few awesome people today. Our facilitator today is Omari Newton. He's an actor, writer, director, and producer. We have Aryn Mott, a queer non-binary performer, certified mental health coordinator, and intimacy coordinator and director. And Paige Louter, a queer theater creator and producer, the co-artistic producer of It's a Zoo Productions, and the operations manager of Currently Arts. And I don't know if I said this, but we're talking about working with challenging content and provocative content in the theater. So it's a really big topic and a really fascinating one. And just to acknowledge that It's a Zoo Productions had a conversation on really similar topics this year. And they approached us because they wanted to continue and expand on that conversation. So we're really grateful for them for bringing this idea to us. We have Paige here sort of representing It's a Zoo. And we're really excited to just continue the chat. So I'm going to pass it over to Omari and yeah, have fun.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Always makes me laugh. Like this morning, we had a conversation on joy, and now here's Omari and friends to talk about challenging conversations, which can also be joyful because the full panel title is looking at practices of care and safety when working with challenging or provocative material. So I want to open up and just hear from our panelists. What is your definition? Like, what do safety and or care look like to you? Maybe we'll start with Paige.
Sure. Yeah. I think the first thing that comes to mind is that safety is an individual state. So it's like you can't tell someone else that they're safe, or you can't create a objectively safe room. So we can aim for safer, and we can give people tools to like self-advocate, and we can do all of our best practice things. But yeah, it's sort of an internal state that nobody else can tell you, okay, yeah, you're good. I have made you safe.
Mm,
So I guess care is all the things that go into making that as possible as can be.
awesome. Thank you. All right. Safety and care. I think you're muted.
Yeah. I think I mean I agree with what Paige just said. I also think it navigates like sustainability and repeatability in terms of safety. Like how do we navigate, when we're telling a story of a certain content, how do we make sure that the performers who are performing it every night have it repeatable and sustainable, and we're taking into thought that idea of care. So if someone has like a physical injury, how do we navigate choreography that supports that performer so that we're telling the story, having the impact we want on the audience, while also navigating this idea of safety and care. I don't know if I can give a definition for care, but here we are.
No, I love that. I love that. I agree with both those. And I'm gonna jump on to things I've learned in working with you, Aryn. Aryn, we work together at Vancouver Film School, where you teach intimacy and consent. And I think to me, it's important to know that safety and care are not fixed. They're ongoing conversations, and I think both of you alluded to that. Whereas the mistake some people make is thinking, I've decided this thing is safe, so it's safe for everyone in the room. I'm not interested in hearing how other individuals feel about it. Like, to me, safety and care is really about checking in with participants and making sure everybody's voice is heard, so you can be clear on how people are feeling, and knowing that, like, at any given moment, someone can change what feels safe for them, and the way you care for one person might be different from how you care for someone else. Great. Well, I'll jump into our first prompt question now. And just for everyone listening, we'll probably talk amongst ourselves for the first 45 minutes to an hour or so. If you have questions you want to ask our panelists or anything that you want us to address, there is a Q&A button that you have access to. Please feel free to put your questions in there. And at the end of this, we will get to those and work through those as well. But for now, I'll open it up here with the first prompt question. And that is, what are your feelings about portraying violence or other challenging, provocative content on stage? And have those feelings changed throughout your career? Maybe Aryn, if you feel comfortable.
Yeah. I think I can answer the second question first, in that have those feelings changed throughout my career? Absolutely. I think when I started out working in this field, I was much like everyone else that came in or around that time, and probably still some folks, is that of a yes and mentality. And I thought the idea of the more challenging, the more provocative, the more impact. And I think it kind of ties into another question that we have around, that does portraying challenging or provocative content need to justify itself. And I just think we easily can put something in that shocks or is a shock value. But I think what we've learned a lot in terms of finding different roles within theater that specialize in different avenues of storytelling, that when we are able to tell something authentically, I mean, also going back to your question of safety, but when we're able to tell it authentically, safely, while still navigating an issue that is challenging with I think that idea of care that we talked about earlier, that is not just care of individuals on stage, but care of individuals in the audience. I think provocative and challenging content is so valuable to have on stage, and it brings me to that. We have conversations around like content warnings, or like information around what people may be engaging in. And I just think as we've progressed as a society and we've learned more about the effects of like trauma on our bodies and individual like experiences, and how we all come into those, we have a due diligence of care for not only those portraying, but those witnessing, in terms of providing them with the essential front-loaded material, not to take away the magic of the story, but so that they, like you said, can fully consent to being in space, or choose not to be in space, or navigate that space for themselves. That whole idea of so many, I think it's like everywhere in the world, like if we look at psychology too, we've found really great ways of storytelling. We've found like great masters who have taught us different techniques. And now I think we have all these great things, and now we are opening up the fact that each individual who comes into the theater to experience something, each performer comes with a different background. And that idea of equality and equity and all of that broadens our perspective on how we tell stories.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Hmm.
Paige, if you want to weigh in.
Yeah. Aryn, I really resonate with the yes and thing. Like for me, especially as a younger actor, I really was like, I'll do anything, and that will prove that I'm like hardworking and I can take it. And there's some shows that I did at the beginning of my career that I'm still sort of like processing some of the like emotional aftermath of. So I think definitely, and I also think I've seen the industry and the way we tell stories shifting a little bit alongside that, where I think this still exists, but I think for a long time we really wanted to see traumatic things happen on stage. Like we wanted to see the trauma to believe that it was like real. And that's also the case in real life. And I feel like that's shifting a little bit, which is really great. But I also came prepared with a Mr. Rogers quote, which is that anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. So I think that anything that can happen to us as humans should be allowed to happen on stage. And the way we do that, like I think needs a lot of care, and a lot more care than has historically been given to those things. And then I think one last thought is just, I think that the times that I felt the most offended by violence or trauma being depicted on stage was either when it felt really careless or when it felt really didactic, like the violence was supposed to teach me something and like violently persuade me of some point, even if it was like a moral point that I really agreed with. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, I can fully relate to what both of you are saying about, especially being a young actor and just like having no real boundaries, And I hope for any young artists who are maybe listening to this panel, right? Like you are not only allowed to, but I think in terms of for your long-term mental health and sustainability, I think it's best that you set clear boundaries about what you feel safe doing or comfortable doing. I think most, I'm 44 now, and I know when I was 27, I was involved in some productions and asked to do some things that like were actively traumatic in the moment, and I'm still unpacking now. And there's just no upside. And again, I'm fortunate now to be in a position where I've been asked to direct some shows and produce some shows. And I always remember that, like, for people in leadership positions, bringing a sense of dialogue and openness into the room is so important if you want to create a safe environment where you can let people care for themselves. Because oftentimes I feel like I didn't have permission to speak up when I was younger. I don't know if y'all can relate to that, but yeah. So yeah, we should
I think
go ahead.
I remember that this is Aryn speaking. So just to jump off, I think what Paige said and then what Omari just said was this about boundaries and how I love to say to folks, it's like, I love someone who's like, I have no boundaries except, maybe my eyes or something. And then the person who says, I have boundaries, I have all of these boundaries. And I think, like Paige said, the Mr. Rogers quote, like, those exist within our human experience as well. And I've seen that within, the vast amount of humans that I've worked with. And it again allows that authenticity of portrayal to exist. And again, that idea of safety being one person, like our own perspective of it. Like I feel like the same No, that sentence just dropped out of my head because I looked down at my note that said boundaries. So the point that I wanted to make that from you to what you had said was, you know, that idea that our bodies don't know the difference. And I love telling performers this, like once they've done a scene, like this idea of the impact it can have on our bodies. And this isn't even necessarily something that is of a lived traumatic experience of ourselves, but when we are portraying emotions and portraying a character and their journey, our bodies don't know the difference. And that's like, thumbs up, you're doing real good acting, is what I always tell people. And we just need to then remind our bodies of how to come back to safety, and that all of that within that process was pretend. But because our bodies can't understand, oh yeah, there's lights and there's sound cues and there's curtains and we have costume changes and stage management and cue to cue, like our cells can't tell that. And so again, finding a process that allows the impact of these stories to occur while allowing the fact that it does have an impact on our bodies.
Yeah. On that note, I can share, you know, I just directed Red Velvet by Lolita Chakrabarti. And it's a piece about the first Black man to play Othello in England. And there's two Black characters in the play. One is Ira Aldridge, the first Black man to play Othello, and the other is Connie, who is a Black female maid who, this is when England was on the cusp of abolishing slavery. So for all intents and purposes, this was a slave, right? And part of what we needed to do as a company to tell this story, a direction I had to give the cast, who were predominantly white, was they had to treat Connie poorly or ignore Connie entirely, right? This to be authentic to the story. That was so as part of our process every single day, and this was to the credit of the cast. It was prompted by the cast. There was like a decompression at the end of rehearsals and at the end of shows where the cast quite literally hugged it out and checked in, because you're right, like it's a lot to carry, not only as if you're the minority who's being mistreated in the story, it's awful to have to treat someone poorly in character, and you're right, your body, if you're doing it properly, doesn't know the difference. So I think you raised some important points. It's really important to learn how to unroll those things. Now, I want to also build on something that was said. You mentioned keeping the audience safe as well as keeping the company safe. And this is something that I find myself reflecting on more and more. And I guess my question is, how do we best make sure to keep the diverse array of people who may be in our audiences safe? How do we figure out what safety is, and how do we continue to be in conversation to make sure audiences are safe during challenging material we're presenting? Solve it in 3 sentences.
Aryn speaking. I feel front loading. I feel like this idea, like you said, Omari, of communication in space. And I think on a lot of the questions, it was like that was a really focused point on a lot of them, is that when we're able to have communication and you know, tiered systems of information that people can access. Also, when I think we have curiosity in terms of might not be everyone who's going to go to your you know, your production's website and look up something, but someone might, and there might be a form that says, hey, what are some things that make going to the theater, you feel brave going to the theater, or makes it you can show up in space and enjoy the theater? Because some of it can be challenging or provocative content, but recently for me, I discovered if I could stand in every performance I go to, I would love that. So again, it's just navigating, and that was just like in Europe when a lot of cheap tickets were standing tickets. So I stood a lot more, and all of a sudden it was like, what a cool way to experience theater that, again, isn't always possible, but like, yeah, how do we have access points for people to share? We have wheelchair accessibilities when we don't have access for folks who use wheelchairs. There's information that says, hey, our second level isn't accessible by this. If you need access, reach out here. And I think we can do the same. And again, it's chipping away at something, but I think we can do the same kind of work with psychological or you know, mental health considerations for folks who come to the theater.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Paige speaking. Aryn, I love that example because that's a specific thing I would need to know, because I cannot stand for the duration of a show. Like my body, like I have a invisible disability. That means I cannot stand without a lot of pain for that long. Yeah, so it's a great point. It's like communication about everything that may, or like your experience as an audience member before the show starts, during and after, like not just from what you're going to see, but like what are the seats like? Like are the seats really tiny? Because people need to know that if they have larger bodies and they're not going to fit in your seats. Or like, do you have relaxed performances where the lights are going to be up? Or like offering all of those things. And then, yeah, I think just a really simple best practice is having that layered content note where people can see like, okay, in general, here are the themes, but then if somebody needs to know, okay, so there's violence, but like, is there gun violence? And then there's an opportunity for them to opt in for more information that might be like a spoiler to someone else, but they need to be prepared with that information. Um, and then one other small thing that I think really helps or can help is if you're able to let audience members leave and then come back in, if your staging will allow for that. I feel like that's a big, like, knowing that if something comes up, you can go and take care of yourself and then still come back and rejoin the experience. I think that's a great thing to offer if you can do it.
Yeah, you just touched on something I want to dig deeper on. Let's talk about relaxed performances and, for lack of a better term, Western theater etiquette and the expectations around Western theater etiquette. And I say this because I'll just be straight up. I had a Black friend come and see one of my shows, and they were super into it, and they talked to the characters on stage the whole time. I loved it, and I know it's a bit of a stereotype, but culturally it is a thing. And I felt like a lot of people around my friend were sort of judging and sort of confused. And I just feel like the idea of, like you said, coming in and sitting down quietly and you mustn't leave till intermission, I feel like it's a pretty Western idea. What are our thoughts on that?
You're like, Aryn, were you heading for the unmute button? Did you have a, okay, this is still Paige talking. Yeah, I feel like it's super like, that works great for like, yeah, like white neurotypical people with no disabilities or anything. Like it is a very like, I think it's part of the status symbol is knowing all the protocols. And I think some things are good to do, like turn off your phone, but I love the idea of someone being like, I'm really, really here with the performer right now live. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, and it's weird because if you go to like a concert, nobody's expected to be, and I know in some level it's louder, but I've even been to like a cappella shows, or like you see a great singer and people will just openly loudly express their passion and joy about what they're witnessing, and it's totally normal. But for some reason in the theater, it's a total no-no.
Yeah, I 100% agree. In terms of we have learned this very like stylized way of going to the theater that again speaks to in a lot of ways the inaccessibility of how I think theater has been for years, and probably how it started as well, or not probably how, but just in terms of, yeah, we don't, the idea of a relaxed performance, or I was at Guys and Dolls a few weeks ago, and there was definitely a group of high schoolers. And again, they were in the show and they were enjoying it. And you could tell, when they were on characters' sides and when, they were like, you shouldn't have said that. But again, I think that is such an active engagement within our experience that we lose out on in this theatrical process. And I also, acknowledge that some folks come to the theater and might be hard of hearing, so a lot of noise again. So there are just larger considerations we've never had before. But yeah, if I could get up and leave or walk around or enjoy or not be like hesitant of my laughter or hesitant of the, oh yeah, me too, like that whole thing that we internalize so much in the theater. And I think some of those expressions could then lead to further dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah. So I feel like maybe, I don't know, more relaxed performances. Normally there's like one in the entire run, right? Or just loosening the standards. I love the idea of more shows where people can come and go as necessary, and maybe just figure out somewhere with seating so it's not as distracting, or just, yeah, changing the way that we look at how we hold space with people.
I love that Aryn speaking, the idea of relaxed performance, because I think we as have an idea of what a relaxed performance is.
Mm-hmm.
Because a relaxed I wouldn't immediately think, oh, I should think about going to a relaxed performance because that means I can laugh or I can do certain things. I often think, oh, it's sometimes there are more lights or there are less visuals, or yeah, so it's interesting, I think, to even just open up the dialogue, not necessarily now, but of what a relaxed performance is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Great. Okay, jumping on that a little bit, staying with the audience now, because I find this fascinating.
Mm.
So I've been fortunate. I've had some shows that have played in different cities in Canada. And of course, we know that depending on the city you're in, the demographics of your audience can be wildly different, right? So I'm curious what your thoughts about, if you are a key creative in a production, let's say if you're a director or whatnot, like how do you feel about adapting or tweaking certain things to accommodate or take into account the audience that you have present? And to me, the concrete example that comes off the top of my head is, as an openly and happily Black writer. I know it's a funny thing to say, but I'm a Black writer who writes Black shit often. Sorry, I don't know if we can swear on this, but I just did. Like, doing a show in Toronto and Montreal, it's a very different audience than doing a show in Vancouver. And so, sometimes there might be some level of audience prep or audience care you have to do in an audience where nobody who looks like the writers or the actors on stage, nobody looks like them. And I just want to know what people's thoughts are about, like, making adaptations based on your expected audience demographics.
I'm curious about like what the intention would be, if it's like to let the audience in more or to challenge them more or challenge them less.
It depends on the show. I can share, for example, I did a production of Passover in Vancouver, and the play is about police brutality. It's two Black actors on stage. There's a white police officer who shoots someone. You know, there it was a predominantly white audience in Vancouver, and my Black friends who went all commented about how awkward that experience was for them, surrounded by white people. And they requested that if there was maybe somebody like an elder who they could decompress with after the show present, you know what I mean? Just accounting for everyone there.
I really value that person's offer. I think we've seen it more often in terms of with different shows having, like you said, an elder or an individual representative or someone that people can talk to. I know when I did a show last year, someone could come and talk to me, but because it was also Indigenous content, um,
And continents.
and continent, we're on the continent. Nice point there, Mott. That there was someone who they could go and speak to who was an Indigenous elder, again, who comes with a lived experience and a different access point for individuals. I think that is a beautiful accommodation to have. I think, like Paige said, that question of what is the purpose of it, and if it is like maybe there needs to be more resources at certain ones, but then again, why not just have all those resources in the whole time? Yeah, but how do you cater to the demographic without sacrificing the important themes or messages of the story that you are going forward with? But how do you take into account, right, we're in a demographic of humans whose lived experience of this might be a lot higher, whose lived experience of knowing someone who has experienced gun violence or died of gun violence is actually like, 1 out of 2 or 1 out of 4, right? I mean, that's beautiful due diligence then for a company to think, oh, maybe we need to have someone there because of this statistic that's involved. And I acknowledge that as a producer or a director, that is one more thing upon a task of a million things that are asked of you folks as you're navigating that. So I also want to say, I hope we continue to have continual support of the arts, so that these roles can exist for theaters to navigate this kind of access, because I think that's also important, is that I never got into theater for the paycheck. I don't know about you guys, but I never started doing it for that, and how do we justify it, I guess.
I was promised dozens of hundreds of dollars. I don't know about you, but I was told, no, I'm with you. I'll jump back to our questions now. Next question here. Do you think theatrical violence has to justify itself? Does there need to be a meaning or message for it to be okay?
I can jump in. This is Paige speaking. My one-word answer is no. But I think that my preference is for it to artistically justify itself. I don't think I want to head in a direction where there needs to be like an ethical justification as a first requirement before you can tell a story. Or like maybe my ethic is like, tell me a good story, and then I'll be able to like think about meanings that come from it. But I think that theater is asked to justify, especially in like the granting system that we have, is asked to justify violence in a way that like film isn't. And I think especially if the violence is fun to watch, I think that's really confusing to funders, and it can be, yeah, like It's a Zoo, that's a lot of what we do, like Affair of Honor, to shout out that company that does a lot of like stage combat based violence, and like they're not actually hurting people on stage. So it's like, it's weird to write a grant and be like, we want to do violence on stage. But sometimes like that is what we want to do. Like we laugh if we see someone like trip, as long as they're okay. Like there is like a human impulse to be compelled by violence. And maybe genre is also a part of it. Like violence in a comedy is really different from violence in like a verbatim documentary piece. I just think I'm more interested in like thinking about a piece of art after I've seen it versus like the art being like, we've written an essay first about why we can have the violence happen. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll pause there.
Aryn speaking. I really appreciate what you just said, Paige, and it's like percolating. So I wonder like how this response will come out, because I feel like it's like yes and no, and I loved hearing what you said about the story and then navigating the point of it, because Affair of Honor, again, it's okay. So this is what I think. As soon as you said Affair of Honor, the idea that as an audience member, there still is a level of knowledge of safety, right? Like I'm inherently like suspending, I have a suspension of disbelief when I come to the theater, which means that like, our audiences are, agreeing to this like fictional world. And like, I still, and I think why I won't say yes and I won't say no is because there are still like ethical and practical like considerations to take regarding like the violence. Like we said, front loading folks. I think seeing in a program that there is a fight director there, that there is an intimacy director there, what that does is cues the audience to know that what they're going to see is rehearsed, is like repeatable, as I said, like sustainable, that it has all those things. And then it can be all of the things that are fun because I know that is then involved. Like the interactions and some of the props even that we use can be dangerous. And so I think knowing that like proper training or choreography and like safety protocols went into it is is important, just because I think that that allows us to go into that in that play. And I think like the depiction of violence I don't know if it needs to serve like a purpose in order to justify itself within the like, I think it needs to serve a purpose within the context of the play, right? Whether that is joyful, whether that is challenging, whether it's shedding light on like a theme, or like it's the development of certain characters, or like it's driving the plot. But there should be like, I think, a meaning behind its inclusion in it too. Like gratuitous violence, I think, without a purpose can be like unsettling. But again, maybe that's what you want folks to feel. But like, I think as long as it doesn't detract from like the overall like artistic narrative, like the integrity of that narrative, I think. And you know, I'll jump back to the Bettys, or you know, that the violence came in from lived experiences of the characters and the circumstances they found themselves in. And you know, what is it, like Vimy, which was Vern Thiessen's show, talks about you know, combat and war in World War II, and there are, you know, scenes, and it deepens an audience's understanding of the themes explored in both of those plays. And that can provoke, I think, thought and discussion, and like beyond the immediate like spectacle that we're watching. And I think that's what European, just to like jump off of, but like European theater does really well. They're not worried about offending, and yet they have I've experienced, and this is probably not across the board, but they just seem to have things in place that allow that kind of jump leap for us to take as audience members.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it depends on context and genre. Because I think, for example, like, you know, I will go and see, let's say, like a Jackie Chan movie because of the awesome fight scenes, which I'm aware are actually dance scenes, right? Like it's choreography. Like, and to me, you know, if you're going to see a Jackie Chan movie, no one's actually well, I was going to say no one actually gets hurt, but Jackie Chan hurts himself all the time. Maybe that's a bad example, but most people who aren't Jackie Chan and who aren't completely out of their mind with no regard for their bodies, you're going to watch well choreographed, protected fights. Whereas, and the idea of gratuitous, like there's way more fighting in a martial arts film, but I've seen plays where there's one gunshot and it's devastating. You know, so I think it depends on the intent of the piece and how it's handled by a company. So I think we all agree you don't have to justify theatrical violence, but you should be thoughtful about the way that you use it. Now, our next question here, what are some care tools that you use as a creator? And that could be links, that could be practices and protocols in the room, that could be books you recommend. What are some care tools that you use as a creator?
I can unmute. Yeah, sure. I think they are continuously evolving. I think like what you said, Omari, in terms of, well, everything that we talked about, that it's fluid and can change. I think each situation can ask or require different things of care for ourselves, and sometimes we find that out in the process of doing that. I certainly, jumping back to something I said before, was creating like a container practice for the work that I do. So something that just signals to my body that I'm starting a process or ending a process. And why I do that, yes, it helps with like clearing out emotions or all sorts of things. But if you do a start and an end, then if anything comes up after this end process, you can then track it back. So you can say, was I feeling this way at the beginning of the day? Okay, no. Was I feeling this way, you know, in that first part of rehearsal? Okay, no, I wasn't. Okay, was I feeling this way, you know, after lunch or whatever? Oh, yeah. Okay, what scene was I doing? Oh, okay, I was doing this scene. Okay, maybe this is some residual emotions or some residual things that are remaining in my body or remaining in our mind. Like it's the like beautiful thing about performing is when you play a character for 18, you know, I don't know why I say 18 days. When you play a character for 8 shows a week, or for, you know, 8-hour rehearsals, your neurological and biological system adapts to that character, which is what's so cool. And so I think creating care practices that allow performers and directors, and like what you said with your play as well, like a closeout at the end, just allows us to then acknowledge that our bodies have gone through a process that maybe we don't navigate normally as human beings. Like you said, if you're yelling obscenities at someone and treating someone and like saying unkind words to that person, that still stays in your cells, and that doesn't feel good, and so navigating a process that again does that thumbs up, you did some good acting, but then allows us to navigate back to that idea of what safety is, because our bodies just that's what we need, and that's what allows us to like jump and explore. Levels of care. I have a therapist. I'll pop that in there. Is that, just I'm a human being. So I've got levels of care when I have folks who I can talk to, that those are friends as well. But those are the first two things I'll say about care. I'll let Paige hop over to it.
Sure. Yeah, Paige speaking. I think maybe my number one care tool from a like producer angle is not trying to crunch too much work into too little time, because urgency is really coercive and it makes people bulldoze their own values and other people's values. And I know, because I am a theater producer, that more time always means more money, and there's never more money. So if you don't have the time and money, do less. Like, don't, like, it's such a fundamentally like extractive thing to be like, well, it must happen, we just have to. And it's like, no, you don't have to. Theater does not need to happen at any cost. That's not real.
That's so true.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. That's my number one care tool. Yeah. I think another one that's on the top of my mind, because I'm developing a solo show that draws on a lot of real life shit that has happened to me. So for that kind of creative process specifically, a big part of it was like waiting until what was an open wound is not an open wound bleeding all over everybody anymore. And then I'm also in that process building in some like release valves and supports that are like that I will perform in the context of the show, like telling the audience what I might need from them in that moment, or being like, okay, I'm gonna take a breath now, and then doing it. So just to offer that in like a new work creation context.
Great. I love that. Theater does not have to happen at all costs. That should be printed on the door of every rehearsal hall. Yeah, I always say when I'm working as a director that like I can't guarantee you that people will love the show. I can't guarantee you that we're going to sell out the show. I can't. But the one thing I feel like you do have control over as a creative is that everybody feels respected, everybody feels protected, that you're looking out for each other, and I find normally when processes happen like that, the work is better. Like I have quite literally never been involved in a production where people were like, I hated showing up every day. The director made us cry. We were all fighting, but the show was amazing. You know what I mean? I've literally never heard that happen. It's weird. I feel like it's like a weird old school mindset, but there's normally a correlation between people feeling valued and respected and the work being good. So now, oh, sorry, you had a thought?
Yeah, I was just gonna, the other care, just because I was jumping off what Paige was thinking, and then what you said as well, is just the idea of like, we are people first. Like when we come into a rehearsal hall, yes, we are here to do a job, but yes, we are human beings first. And so that idea of person first, I think, is that, and maybe that doesn't mean like every day we sit around and we do a check-in, but knowing that if something comes up and you need additional support, that is there and that's celebrated. Because I think, again, we can throw out all these like care things and tools and everything, and I think there's still a lot and I'd like to acknowledge that there's still a lot of shame and stigma around probably talking or accessing these things. And certainly I experienced that as a young human when I was like the yes and. So I think like there's that to navigate as well. Yeah, so maybe it isn't a check-in, but how do we continue to allow communication, right? That it is ongoing, that it is continual, and that, if we look at anyone's life in the past like year, I don't know why I'll say last year, but people have gone through all sorts of journeys, and that can beautifully enhance someone's performance. It can challenge someone's performance, but again, if the care tools are there for them to do it, then they can navigate it. I think it's talking about folks having access, and this is, I won't jump down this hole, but I'll just pop it in and then I'll send some resources of folks just having access to core needs and what that means, and how do we have those which are fundamental as human beings within a theatrical space.
Yeah. I saw a little funny story side note. I was holding auditions and we had somebody message and say, I'm so sorry. I'm going to be a bit late, but I can totally reschedule. I got into a car accident. Is that okay? And I was like, obviously it's fine. I was like, do you want us to like, what do you need? Can we send you ice? Can we send but just, it was wild to me that there's a culture where somebody was apologizing for getting into a car accident and asking if it was okay. Like, we need to normalize people prioritizing core needs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or like if you break your foot, your biggest I dislocated my knee, and my biggest concern was, how am I going to navigate doing this children's show with puppets? Not what do I need to do to help my knee heal?
but we know,
like, because, do we need to navigate one of these shows without you, Aryn? Like,
yeah.
I was just like, how do I make it 9 a.m. call? How do I do it while I'm at the hospital with a dislocated knee? It's like, no.
But I feel like pre-COVID, that was the culture, right? Where it was like,
absolutely,
show must go on, suck it up. And it's insane. It's totally insane.
Amadeus, I remember seeing, and I remember the performer playing Amadeus was so ill, there were puke buckets on each side of the stage. And you're like, how is that a level of care?
Oh.
And as much as COVID has challenged us, I think, and man, yeah. It did bring to light some of these like larger things that it's like, oh, right, these are human beings who are navigating these stories and who can't perform because they have a fever, like whatever. Yeah.
Well, and on the other side of the coin, another question here, is there such thing as too much care? How do you find that line?
Yes, absolutely. I would say in my role as an intimacy director and a mental health like coordinator, I have learned to be like water and flow. I think you can have all of the tools, and you need to read a room. And, I say to people, certainly like if I do like an intro workshop with theaters, I'll say to people, hey, I'm going to put out a whole bunch of clothes. I don't know why I use a clothes mentality. And you're going to put them on, and what services you can keep, and what doesn't, like, you don't have to keep. And, I think it is a workspace. If something comes up for someone, yes, I don't think that is necessarily within the space to deal with it, because most of the people in the space aren't equipped for that. But I think, the idea of too much care, the idea then is, how do we make sure that person has access to the things that they then need? Because a lot of times, I think Paige said it earlier, where it's like, don't do the thing that might be still splurting. Sometimes we don't know when it's going to spurt, right? Like, I could be doing something and all of a sudden my body could have a remembrance of something that I don't even know. And so I think when I think of too much care, like opening emotional or trauma bubble up, that just makes me think to like acting exercises that were like, hey, tell me this awful story. Like, as opposed to being, I think we can try to mother and just try to like overcare, and that's not our job. And people first, I think, is
yeah. Paige is speaking. I think that's exactly everything you said, Aryn. Yes, I really, yeah, like I've seen people kind of overhelp in the moment and like step into what is actually the role of a mental health professional. So I think it's like not even just focusing on somebody who's like maybe, trauma dumping in the room, but then also like theater is full of amazing helpers. But then, so if you are a helper, like knowing the limit of your own professional expertise and not being like, I'm gonna help this person deal with all their traumas in the rehearsal room right now. And I think the other thing that comes to mind with like over helping is this thing that's come up like quite a bit in the last few years is like what can be like a check-in circle, especially if there are things that if the room has not been given tools to have like smaller check-ins before something is becoming really toxic, then yeah, like these circles can take up a lot of space and time and energy. And I think we sometimes don't want to shut that down because it feels like, oh, well, we're working on traumatic material and I'm telling you you can't process it. But I think that process really favors people who are verbal processors and are like quick to think and then express and are confident and are like the loud voices in the room. So I'm sure that there are healthy ways to do that, but then you also have to think about like who's getting left out of that like care process. You can't just like have a big circle where 5 people explode and then they feel better and then you've got someone in the corner who's like, I don't agree with anything that was just said. And yeah, so I have big question marks around that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Na- Navigating the balance between giving everyone a platform, but also recognizing, like you said, that some people process things differently, and some people are more verbal, and some people are. And how do you stay checked in with the room to see if this process is serving everyone? It's tricky. It's really, really tricky. Um, so we'll open it up to questions soon. We have a couple already in the chat, but there's some great pre-recorded ones I want to ask you here. So what are some things that you wish producers and directors knew about? I mean, it says fight and intimacy direction, but I'll just say dealing with challenging material. What are some things you wish producers and directors knew about things like fight and intimacy direction or dealing with challenging material?
I'll jump in here. I've got a quick little list, Paige speaking. I'm also training as an intimacy director, so this is also kind of with Aryn on my brain. If you are a producer engaging a fight or intimacy director, great. You should interview them to see if they're the right person for your project. You like every person is not exactly the right collaborator to slot in. They're helping you create a safer room. They're an artistic collaborator. So you should actually talk to them before just being like, you're free, great. Second, certification is a really big topic. Not everybody chooses to get certified. And just because someone is certified, it doesn't mean you've done your due diligence as a producer when you're bringing them on board. And yes, because Aryn is here, we have the benefit of asking them about this, but intimacy directors typically have like mental health first aid training, but that doesn't mean that they are a mental health professional. Like Aryn is a mental health coordinator. Is that the right title? Yes. So that's a distinct role. So just to throw that out there as well. And then, yeah, I guess last, hiring these people means that you can do bigger and riskier and bolder things because the foundation is safe and strong and people feel free and safer to do those things.
Great.
Yeah. End of sentence. I agree with everything that Paige just said. I think that idea that the body doesn't know that we're playing pretend is just something that folks who maybe aren't in a space or have performed a lot, maybe who have done more directing than acting, just haven't felt that cellularly in their body. And so I think just having that awareness. I think that idea that you said, Omari, just at the beginning of like ongoing communication, right? That is consent. And so I think, if that comes from producers and directors in terms of continual conversation and the ability for things to change and adapt because of those needs. One thing I like to tell directors and producers is, like, I guarantee we can get the spiciness and the flavor and the impact that we want in the scenes within the boundaries of the performers. I think what is so beautiful of directors and other artists and producers is that they have such a beautiful, like, big picture frame. And yes, they are very good at like looking at the small pieces as well. But when you're bringing someone on who has a specialty in staging violence, or a specialty in staging intimacy, or a specialty in staging stories of mental health content or mental health challenges, you're having a specialist's eye who is going to listen to everything that you want on stage, and then meet with and be like your middle ground. Like, they're going to be the people like who are like, we know that hierarchy exists, and unfortunately, because of hierarchy, like, there can be power dynamics that mean that a performer may say yes when they actually aren't really confident about something, and these people just act as like the middle ground to be like, I'm not part of production. I'm here to listen to your boundaries and what those are, and then find the story that again is going to be impactful. Like you said, sometimes it's not about the huge fights, it's about that one gunshot. And again, if we come back to that idea of why is it in the story, I think it's just, yeah, you just have a specialist, and I think it can, when you have carried the responsibility of storytelling and those kind of aspects for so many years, and you protected your performers, I think there can be a hesitancy to that because you just don't know. And I hope that every person that you interview and then take on board as a collaborator really does collaborate, because that's what I think. I didn't get into storytelling. I got into storytelling because, well, I wore a big pink frilly dress and I ate McDonald's French fries on stage, and I was in community. Like, and I think that's what storytelling is. It is timeless in the fact that we have gathered for thousands of years to tell of these stories, and violence and challenging content has been our experience as human beings and has existed in our stories. Again, we've just progressed. We've just been on Earth longer, so now we just have some more tools. And one thing I will say about jumping back to like just my experience of working with Omari is that I believe that I work in a space where we're like, we might mess up, but we're going to talk about it. And I think that's like, we're not going to be flawless in life, but when we suit up and we show up to those moments and we say, hey, next time we can try something differently, again, that's where we progress. And I think that's where, yeah, period.
I mean, personally, I've never made a mistake, so I can't relate. I've never.
I know, right?
Yeah, I don't. I hear some people do, but no. That's great. That's great. We have 6 audience questions and comments and about 25 minutes. So we're going to try our best to be concise in our answers. But the first one, this is from an anonymous attendee, said, it's been mentioned that safety can look different for different people and that there are different cultural expectations around talking in the theater. Can you comment on navigating conflicting access needs?
Mm-hmm.
I have thoughts on this.
Go ahead, Omari.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. Well, we talk a lot at the school about reasonable accommodation. And I think that, cultural norms and bending them a little bit, like allowing people to talk in the theater, are dependent on if commentary or talk is connected to what's happening on stage, and if it's done in a way that is at least somewhat mindful that other people are in the room. I don't mind the odd, like, look out or get him. But if you're having a full conversation about something unrelated to the show, not cool. Yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, I think just to jump on the conflicting access needs, I think that's in some ways maybe what the idea of like a relaxed performance can sometimes navigate in terms of, um, yeah, um, yeah. Sorry, I just got stuck on being like, well, what would happen if this or this then happened? How would you navigate that? Um, so maybe that's just where my thought ends, is that, that's the idea of how do we, right now we only have relaxed performances. And that is like a specific title that we use for these things. So, maybe some of these access needs that are easily accommodated, larger seats or accessible seats, wheelchair accessibility, some of these ones will naturally just like implement or implant themselves within the space without what you say, what I would assume is kind of conflicting with someone else's needs, and I think that's part of the, like Omari said, like you don't want someone having a full-fledged conversation about something completely different, but I think when we hold so tightly to our way of navigating something, that again doesn't allow us to experience the empathy of being a human. And like if someone is more vocal in a theater, as long as it's within, again, within the context of the show, how can I create space to say that's just how that person, wow, that person's enjoying theater, and then hop back into it or whatever it is, it's how do I acknowledge and then still come back to the story? Because you've also chosen to not watch it in your house. So you've chosen to also put yourself in a space with however many other individuals. And yes, we have, North America, has come up with this idea of how we see theater. But again, we are agreeing to be in space with people. And so I think maybe that's the end of my sentence.
Paige speaking. I just want to throw in a couple quick thoughts about conflicting access needs in a creative process. I think what comes to mind is like, as you're building your team, having those needs or conversations about needs like early and often, so that really quickly, like let's say there's your director is a working parent and they can only rehearse during certain hours, and you are starting with committing to that director. And then if you know that, you then won't bring on people to that particular project who can only rehearse in the morning. So I think one way, like that's kind of more about avoiding it. There's like so much nuance and it depends so much on the context. What would happen if people are already, contracted to a project and things appear to be conflicting? But I think, yeah, the way through would be like in relationship and in conversation, which is pretty broad and maybe not super helpful, but
I think the last thing I would toss in there is like that idea of access needs surveys, because sometimes I think if the idea is, oh, I'm going to learn all these things right at the first rehearsal, then you're trying to accommodate a whole bunch of things. But what we do at school is we get access needs forms, and so if I see that a student doesn't thrive with having like green on the whiteboard, well, I don't have to tell the whole class. I just pull out the white, the black marker. So there's just certain things that I think we can navigate respectfully that again might just then work themselves in, and then and of course that doesn't really solve the navigating conflicting ones, but I just mean in terms of addressing them or being able to navigate them as soon as possible.
All right. Next question / comment is Will Wiegler says, and it's more of a comment, says, what we're talking about with relaxed performance is described so beautifully by old dead European white guy Bertolt Brecht, right? He wrote about thinking of theater audiences watching the stage like boxing fans watching a match at a boxing arena, jumping up and down in the seats and commenting on how they feel about what's happening there. Agreed. Some of the old dead white guys had some decent ideas. I'm just saying, Siobhan Powell said, I'd be curious to hear more about how companies that you're working with are, oh, hang on. I'd be curious to hear about how companies that you're working with are pre-planning for safer spaces when they're presenting, producing work with difficult subject matter. From a management perspective, I'm finding the companies I'm working with are all still in a bit of a reactive state with things like relaxed performances, dedicated safe spaces to decompress, etc. The intentions feel valid and good, but at odds with the budget and timeline production, feels like accommodations and considerations are being jammed into these conventional production schedules and sometimes compromise delivery. I've got thoughts on this. Oh, and apologies, I speak very fast, and I was doing that. I will slow it down. I'm sorry. Thank you.
I'll speak to some of the work that I've recently done in terms of being a mental health advocate in spaces. Is that I've met with productions and we've done a whole like breakdown of, or sorry, companies. We've done a breakdown of their entire company and their values and their goals and where there are challenges or not resources, and how to build in safety plans. And I totally acknowledge that idea of folks are still in a reactive state. And I think, again, that comes back to this idea of the lack of funding in the arts, kind of, and the idea that they're just like time, there isn't the time that we need. And so that's why I think, yeah, that idea of pre-planning and that it's not an overnight change, right? It's looking at what are sustainable changes that companies can make within their process, to start implementing them. I think that idea, like Paige mentioned earlier, of the tiered systems, like there's tiered access systems. And Paige, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would say first that there are incremental things that you can do as a company that like do cost money, but it's not like $10,000. Like one thing that It's a Zoo does consistently, and we put it in all our grant budgets, is we have $1,000 that is like an access pool, and anybody can access that for things like, we went late and you live in Surrey, and so we're gonna Uber you home, or you need physio and you're not equity and you don't have benefits. Or so I think starting incrementally and like, yeah, like if you're on operating and your budgets are based on, you know, older practices, and now you're like, where does the intimacy director fit? It can kind of be a bit of a slow process year over year. And don't ask, like, as we're saying, like, don't ask actors to do things at all costs. Like, don't turn to your underpaid theater administrators and be like, solve everything by your next production at all costs. Like, don't commit yourself to wanting to, or to offering access things and like better yeah, like safety procedures if you don't have the resources for them yet. But start to think about what you do want to offer and like build toward that, and start putting it in your grant budgets, and talk to somebody like Aryn who can go through your budget with you.
Okay. Next question or comment is from Jack Patterson. And hello, Jack. There are two questions, but I think we might have answered the second one. But the first one is, what do you each consider as challenging or provocative material? I can take this one.
Yeah.
To me, challenging or provocative material is material that is outside of societal norms, or pushes beyond dominant mainstream understanding about a subject, or focuses on a group that is outside of the mainstream, you know. Provocative would be the same thing, subject matter that is, for lack of a better term, subject matter that's a bit outside of quote unquote polite society, right? That conversations that you shouldn't be having, or subjects you shouldn't be tackling.
Paige speaking. I also think it's so culturally specific. Like, just to take one example, I went to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival a couple summers ago, and there were nude actors in like half of the things I saw. And that so rarely happens in North America. So I think it's also like individual to the performer and to the audience member, like what is or isn't gonna challenge them.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone has said, and I think I'd throw in when there's like what is heightened emotional content. But I think that's kind of what Omari and what Paige said is just when are the themes that we are telling in a heightened state, or when are the themes that we're telling are of the lived experiences of the demographic that we're telling a story of.
Right. Question part 2 actually is, what are suggestions for low or no budget creators when it comes to considering things like accessibility and just making safe spaces? Well, go ahead, Paige.
Yeah, I'm just looking, I've got some notes about this. So, okay, low or no cost. I mean, if you can even have like $200 of money for an access pool, like that could really help. Like it doesn't have to be $1,000 as one thing. I think specifically naming accommodations that you can offer to somebody instead of just saying, let us know if you need anything. So kind of thinking through, oh, what could we offer? And then like verbalizing that or writing that out. If you can't offer a living wage, which there's equity contracts that don't calculate out to a living wage per hour, offer flexibility to recognize that the artist is sacrificing to be in the room with you. A 5-day work week, so pay everybody the same, but do less days. For a reporting process, think about having like, instead of like a ladder where you talk to the person directly above you, you can think about like a spider web instead, where people are allowed to talk to whoever is like a safe person for them to go to, so that one person who's maybe causing the issue is not like blocking someone from getting help that they might need. And yeah, getting clear on what is your process for if there's an incident, if there's like verbal abuse, think through that before it happens. So like those things cost time to set up. But yeah, you don't have to have extra money to do those things in general.
If I can add, I feel like everyone should take an entry-level workshop on things like consent and intimacy and know the basic principles. I feel like just incorporating, even if you have no money, incorporating the practice of basic stuff like, is it okay if this actor touches your shoulder? How are you feeling today? And this is stuff that is covered in consent and intimacy, that even if you don't have budget to bring someone in, which you should make budget to bring someone in, if you're following these basic principles, you'll at least have a framework for allowing people to say no. And we have our final question / comment here. It says, this is an anonymous attendee. There's been a lot of discussion about safety when being in a room together, preparing people to enter a theater space. Can you talk about how safety frameworks may need to adapt when an artistic collaboration or presentation is asynchronous, digital, or remote? I will.
Can you read that one more time? I can't see the question. Oh, maybe if I go down further, I just need to be able to, oh, there we go.
Yeah, I can read it again. So there's been lots of discussion about safety when being in a room together, preparing to enter the theater space. Can you talk about how safety frameworks may need to adapt when an artistic collaboration or presentation is asynchronous, digital, or remote?
Mm-hmm. I think that's the idea, like the 2 words that I'm taking is safety framework. And when we look at like a framework of something, it's like, how do we mold that to then fit the need of the space that we're in? So I think it's just the diligence of acknowledging what additional needs may be in place for something that is asynchronous or is digital, where there may be where people may be watching it later. So, if you had an access point that someone could talk to during the show, well, how do we know that there's, an access point, or there's, resources, helplines or something that folks can reach out to afterwards? I think it's taking whatever levels of care that you've developed within a smaller space. And then I like Paige's version of like the web, like how do you expand that web out to then maybe not meet all of the needs that you meet within that smaller space, but that takes into consideration at least some of the additional requirements that folks could benefit from.
Great.
I know that we said that was the last question, but there's another question I really want to touch on because it talks about like we've been talking a lot about actors and audience, and it touches on care for like stage management and design team and crew. And so I just wanted to quickly speak to that. One thing that I haven't done before as a producer, but I want to do going forward is budget to have backup stage management if they have a sick day, so that if a stage manager is sick, they can stay home like an actor can stay home if they're sick. I don't know what that looks like for directors. Like, I think that care for directors in a process is really like such a big topic. We can't solve it today, but like if people have ideas, I want to know them. And then as you're communicating with an actor, like to say, hey, if you're auditioning for this role, there's intimacy or there's violence, like making sure your design team knows, making sure your crew know, like today we're doing like this scene of violence that's going to be in the rehearsal hall, heads up, and like giving all those people the same access to your surveys and your access need pool of money if you have it. I just wanted to touch on that quickly.
Mm-hmm. If I can, was
No,
that?
no, that was a
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think just eliminating. Sometimes you walk on a set or into a rehearsal room, and there's a weird hierarchy where for some reason the creative team thinks that they're here and the production team is it, and we all know it's ridiculous, right? But if that is present in your room, just go out of your way to make it clear that there is no hierarchy. We're all co-collaborators here to create something beautiful. And to me, it's like I'll literally like if a sound designer has a well-observed thought about lighting, it is welcome in the room. You know, if stage management flags something looks unsafe, they are welcome to bring it up. If a 9-year-old actor notices something that they feel uncomfortable with, like make it a safe room where everyone's voice is welcome to speak, whether they're artists or technicians or whatever. And I feel like that's a good way to kind of foster a safer, welcoming environment. Yeah. Well, we amazingly, first of all, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much, Paige. Thank you so much, Aryn, and thank you GVPTA for hosting this conversation. I learned a lot and had a great time. There's no other questions. We did it, and we did it in the allotted time.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Omari and team. Really grateful for this conversation. I think that it's definitely something that the community continues to discuss, a lot of these questions, and we don't know the answers to many, but there's a lot of really awesome resources here. So thank you so much. And thank you again to Itsuzu for bringing this idea forward to us. I'll just say one more time for the folks here that if you showed up late or you just like to listen again or share this with friends, it will be available on our website probably by the end of the week, along with our 2 other panels from today. Thank you again to the panelists and to our ASL interpreters. We're really grateful to have you here. And this is our last chance to register to join us next week, next Monday. A lot of these same ideas around care. How do we care for ourselves? Just take a day off, eat some good food, make some art, be together. So please register if you'd like. And please don't hesitate to apply for the subsidy if you feel like that's stopping you from showing up. And we're just so grateful to have you here, and it's been a great day. So thanks so much, everybody. Enjoy
Thanks,
the
guys.
afternoon.
Yep, have a great rest of your day, everyone. Take care.